Rachel. I think it would be appropriate to begin with prayer. Let's bow our heads. Dear Jesus, we come to you to ask for your blessings in our presentation today. Help us to learn what you want us to learn as far as how to be inclusive to all people and how to proclaim the gospel to all children. Please guide us and bless us in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, if you see me looking away from you, I'm actually looking at you. I just have different monitors and your pictures or your faces are in another monitor. So good afternoon. Welcome to our session on Sabbath School and Special Needs. And I am humbled to have been asked to share with you today. To tell you the truth, I'm a little apprehensive because I don't feel that I'm an expert on everything special needs. But I appreciate that God has given me a story to tell, and it is a story worth telling because I know it can help others and it can help us in fulfilling the great need in our ministering to all children. So my name is Hildelisa Flickinger, and this is my family. My husband, Eric, and I are privileged to be parents to two wonderful teenagers. My daughter, Noelani, is 15, and my son, or our son, Justin, is 13. And Noelani happens to have Down syndrome. So I'm an expert on disabilities just based on my experience with my daughter. But let me tell you a little bit about Down syndrome. Down syndrome is a genetic disorder that's caused by abnormal cell division that results in extra genetic material from chromosome number 21. So you have probably heard it called trisomy 21. And babies typically are born with 46 chromosomes, but babies with Down syndrome have an extra copy of chromosome 21. So they have that extra something special. And this extra copy changes how the baby's brain and body develop, and it causes a lot of developmental and intellectual delays. It is the most common chromosomal condition diagnosed in the United States. About 6,000 babies every year are born with Down syndrome. It's about 1 in 700 babies. Now let's begin when we're thinking of this topic of special needs in our Sabbath schools. First, I want to backtrack and begin with the big picture, remind ourselves of our mission as a church, and that is to make disciples of Jesus and proclaim to all people the gospel of the three angel messages. And just to bring in more specifically as our mission as children's Sabbath school leaders, why do we do what we do? Well, if we go to the website there, the official mission is the mission of the Children's Ministry Department is to nurture children into a loving, serving relationship with Jesus. We seek to fulfill our mission by developing the following. And then it lists 7 points. I'm just going to read the first 2. Number 1, grace-oriented ministries in which all children, except those with special needs, will experience the unconditional love of Jesus, find assurance of acceptance and forgiveness, and make a commitment to Him and develop their faith. I hope you caught that. I did not read it correctly. It did not say all children except those with special needs. It said all children will experience the unconditional love of Jesus. And number 2, inclusive ministries, in which the volunteers who minister and the children to whom they minister will be valued and involved regardless of race, color, language, gender, age, abilities, or socioeconomic circumstances. So it's essential, and it goes without saying, that there is inclusion for all. God does not exclude anyone. We are all sinners in need of a savior. Now, the question is, are our Sabbath schools or our churches inclusive Sabbath schools and churches? What are some of the ways we can be more inclusive of children and individuals with special needs? Now, notice that I'm saying inclusive. When I say inclusive or inclusion, I'm not just talking about a welcoming environment, which is very important. That's a start. We need to be very welcoming, but that does not mean inclusion. It's very different. We'll see the difference in a little bit. So when we're planning for our Sabbath schools, we need to be intentional about inclusion, because we have a vast mission field right here where we're at. This research from the Centers for Disease Control shows that about 1 in 6 children have developmental disabilities, meaning chronic physical and mental impairment. Chronic physical and or mental impairment. In addition to this, there are many other types of disabilities. So the statistics would be even more than just 1 in 6. But when you glance, if you glanced at your church, the sanctuary, or in your Sabbath school classrooms, Sabbath morning, would you see any people with disabilities, and specifically intellectual disabilities? Or is there a marked absence of such people in your church? I know in my church, I don't see many other than my daughter. And most churches, I think, it's the same. So where are all these children? Where are all these families, these people? They're not in our churches. One reason, I think, that might be the case, that we don't see this very often in our churches. If you see this, this illustration, you know, a lady without kids, and then once kids come along, it's a little hectic. But if you become a mom of a child with special needs, life is really, that hecticness is kicked up many, many notches. So families with touched by disability, especially in the early years, just don't have the energy to deal with any obstacles in the church or anywhere. Just the energy required for their daily lives is mind-boggling. They're on survival mode. There's also countless medical appointments, treatments, therapies to juggle. And by the time Sabbath comes along, to think of the energy, the effort, and the obstacles to go to church can be paralyzing. I've been there, so I know. And if the church is not welcoming and there's very little support and maybe no effort, or we're just not intentional in seeking and including these families, they're just not going to be in church. They're not going to be in Sabbath school. So to me, that could be a reason why we don't see these people in our congregations. Now, the difference between hospitality and inclusion. Yes, we need to be very hospitable, very welcoming. But if we're welcoming and then we show them to the mother's room and segregate them, that's really not being inclusive. The definition of inclusion and inclusive classroom is one which gives the children with disabilities the opportunity to learn to receive the gospel alongside their peers in age-appropriate classrooms. Each child is supported to learn, to contribute, and participate in all aspects of life and educate of the church life and the education in the Sabbath school within the inclusive classroom. So care must be taken to focus on an inclusive approach, not just an approach in which those with special needs are welcome to the church and then directed to segregated programs. An article in Christianity Today pointed out that churches often have many barriers to inclusion of people with disabilities. And those barriers could be physical, maybe lack of wheelchair ramps. It could be communication, certain lighting or sounds, or just all visual inputs. They might be upsetting to certain special needs. I'm thinking of autism for this. The programming could be an obstacle. If all the activities are things that kids with different needs are unable to participate in, that could be a barrier. And one big one is our attitudes, a degrading comment or behavior, or the thought of, is that child really getting anything out of this? Those are all big barriers. The odds of a child with autism never attending religious services were nearly twice as high as compared to children with no chronic health conditions. And the odds of never attending also were significantly higher for children with developmental delays, ADD, ADHD, learning disabilities, or behavior disorders. So to me, this is really sad of the idea that some of these children will never attend church. They will never have the opportunity to learn about a loving Savior. Really, really mind-boggling. So what does inclusion really look like? There is, of course, definitely a need for inclusion, and every child is an equal participant in the learning process. That's what inclusion is. So we have 4 models here in this picture. We have the exclusion model, in which those with special needs are outside the circle. Then we have the segregation model. Maybe we have a separate classroom just for them. Or we have the integration model, which is moving in the right direction, but it's still not the goal. So in integration, they are in the same environment, in the same classroom, but they are still kind of segregated, doing their own thing. But the goal should be this last picture here, the picture of inclusion, where we see all children together, disabled, non-disabled, working in the same thing, learning the same thing together. And that is the goal. Now, is it worth it? Because it takes some planning. Is all the work worth it? And of course, it is a resounding yes. The answer is a resounding yes. So all children should have equal access to the education. All children should learn alongside with their same age peers and focus on abilities, not disabilities. And you'll see what I mean by that. We need to focus not on what the child cannot do, but what is the child able to do, and then focus on those strengths when we are planning on how to include them. Reasons for inclusion is that children become accepting and understanding of one another's abilities, talents, personalities, and needs, and they form meaningful relationships and friendships. So research shows that there's many significant benefits to including children with special needs. And those are not just benefits for the child with special needs, but they are benefits to the children who don't have the special needs, to the non-disabled peers. Because when they grow up, they will no longer think of these other people as strange or people we need to avoid, or how do we communicate with these people? But if they grow alongside and learn alongside the kids who have disabilities, they will truly learn to understand them, to have empathy, and to be true friends. Now, when in preparation for this talk, I wanted to find out what our church had to offer for people with disabilities. And of course, we have all seen that we have ministries to the blind and the hearing impaired. You know, we have the different things in Braille, and we have things recorded so that people can just listen to the lesson. We also have, in many churches, you have the hearing devices that those with hearing impairment can use. So there's ministry to those people and supports for them. Then there is the Adventist Possibility Ministries. And I was very excited about this because it's a whole ministry for people with disabilities that is part of the worldwide church from the General Conference. We even have a special Sabbath a year that's devoted to awareness to special needs. But looking at this Adventist Possibility Ministries, I went to their information, their website, and I discovered that they minister to 7 categories of people with special needs, 7 ministry categories. As you see there. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read them, but I was eager to find where my daughter fit in. So I went down the list and I noticed, wait a minute, my daughter doesn't fit into any of those categories. You might say, well, maybe the emotionally and mentally challenged, but not really, because then I read more in the detail what their ministry was. And it was more for people with mental disability, well, with mental disorders, maybe like depression, anxiety, things like that, emotional disorders. It was not the same as a developmental disability or intellectual disability. So I was surprised to see that there is a need to minister to those with intellectual disabilities. So in my talk today, I'm going to focus on that, on intellectual disabilities. What does this look like? A child with intellectual disabilities, they're going to be delayed in speech, delayed in their motor function, fine motor and gross motor functions, like sitting up and walking. They're going to have trouble remembering. Their working memory is going to be challenged. Trouble with social rules, understanding consequences of actions, and trouble solving problems and thinking logically. So that gives you a little picture. Now, before looking at specific strategies to support these students, the most important premise that we need to begin with is this. You have to presume competence. What does that mean? It's a mindset that every child, regardless of ability, every child has intellectual ability and an inherent, there's a typo there, sorry, an inherent desire to learn, to contribute, and be engaged in relationships with others. We must start there, because if we assume incompetence, then why should we even bother providing supports for them? Why should we even bother including them? But we must start with presuming competence, because we will be surprised, and you will see later on, again, what I mean by that. So number 1, presume competence. Let's talk about some things that we can implement to create this inclusive environment. We refer to these things as accommodations. Accommodations remove learning barriers in the classroom and provide every child with equal access to learning. So they allow a student to complete the same task, learn the same information, but with some variation in time, format, setting, and presentation. So the purpose is to provide a student with equal access to learning and an equal opportunity to show what he knows and what he can do. So let's focus a little bit more on the child with Down syndrome. And as I go through these, this will apply also to other developmental disabilities as well, a lot of these points. There are certain health conditions that affect learning, especially in a child with Down syndrome. One of those is hypotonia. Now, hypotonia is low muscle tone. It's the resistance to movement in a muscle. So this is going to affect many things, all the things you see there on that picture. And to understand the physical demands that is placed on a child with Down syndrome that has low muscle tone, you can imagine cooking dinner while wearing socks on your hands. So very frustrating, right? And that's the same frustration a child with Down syndrome would experience when they want to do a task, but they just are unable because of their low muscle tone. Now also, so we need to allow for extra time. One accommodation you can do in your classroom is to allow extra time for them to complete the task that you're asking them to do. Also, the physical demands for a child with hypotonia standing for a long period of time is equivalent to holding a squatting position. So they're going to begin shuffling and maybe behaving in an undesirable way if they have to stand for a long time. But again, imagine I would feel uncomfortable too, and pretty soon start to behave, and maybe not desirably, if I had to hold that position. So let's say you're doing an activity and it requires children to be standing for a long time. You need to keep in mind that that child with special needs is going to have some difficulty with that. And this same low muscle tone affects speech intelligibility because it causes jaw movement difficulties, motor planning difficulties. And again, you can sort of understand if you imagine trying to communicate your needs while your mouth is full. So same idea. Allow extra time to process information and to respond. Use simple questions, ask questions requiring short answers. And if your student knows sign language, you can learn some basic signs so you can communicate with them. And keep in mind when you're trying, for example, if they're learning a memory verse in the Sabbath school, and it's maybe a longer verse, well, just a simple phrase, if the child is able to say, Jesus loves me, if that is stated and understood, it's going to reflect a deeply significant spiritual understanding in a child with limited cognitive and verbal abilities. And so they might not be able to verbalize the whole memory verse, but if you can focus in teaching them part of the verb, the significant part, and they're able to understand it and repeat it, they learn the concept. So just maybe require shorter answers and keep that in mind. Another thing is there is a difference, and I think I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me stick to this. The working memory, the short-term memory is challenging for children with Down syndrome. This makes it harder for them to access, understand, and process information at the same speed as other students. Now, it doesn't mean they cannot learn it. They're able to learn it. It's just going to require more repetition, maybe more time for them to process it. So we need to allow extra time to learn, break down information or instructions into smaller chunks at a time. So if you give a set of instructions, maybe a set of 3 instructions, by the time you finish the instructions, the child would not be able to remember the first set of instructions. So maybe just give instructions one at a time to give time for the student to process. A lot of the times we think, oh, the student doesn't understand, or the student is not behaving properly. But the fact is that maybe they have already forgotten the instructions that were given. So very important to understand that. We're going to require a lot of repetition and allow more practice. And you know, when we implement these accommodations, they not only benefit the child with special needs, but they will benefit all children. What child would not benefit from listening to the instructions in shorter chunks? Every child would benefit from repetition. So another thing you can do is to use labeling or verbal associations. Provide visual cues and prompts that the child, if you just give verbal directions, they might not be able to follow them. But if there are pictures to go with those directions, or maybe a visual schedule, like we'll see in the next slide, that will help the child to anchor this child. Oh, this is what's going on next. I can see that. So they don't just have to keep in their memory what they just heard, but they can also, if they forget, they can also refer to a picture that will direct them to the task at hand. So we want to make tasks interesting and meaningful for the student and have hands-on activities. And again, that would benefit every child. Visual schedules. This is a couple of examples of what I mean by that. If you have a certain schedule that the class follows, why not put it in a visual? And that way, the child with special needs is able to take some ownership and know exactly what to expect. They will not feel lost or maybe feel out of control, but they can follow along and know exactly what's coming on next. This is really, really important. Schedules and visual schedules is really important, really helpful to manage behavior in a child with special needs. They will often have hearing problems. So for hearing problems, of course, you want to place the student in the front of the class, close to the teacher, speak directly to the student, and supplement with signs, gestures, or with visuals. Use visual aids, write on the board, do some drawings, use felts. Anything that would be visual will help the child with hearing problems. And maybe rephrase and repeat your instructions. Place the student at the front of the class. I already mentioned that. Use larger font. So if you have a handout for the class, or you have a poster that you're showing, pay attention to the size of the font, because you hand something with a handout to a child with special needs, with visual problems, and the font is really small, it's going to be meaningless to them. But if they can see it, they'll be able to have more meaning for that particular task. So use larger font, use visual aids, maybe signs on the walls. Now, I have to, throughout the presentation, you're going to see a lot of pictures of my daughter and our church. And we go to South Bay Church, and we're in the process of building a church. And because of COVID, anyways, a long story, but we meet outdoors. And so when I refer to our church, you'll see a lot of outdoors, or maybe a tent. And you might think, wait a minute, that's church? Yes, it is church. Okay. Again, the font, use technology. You can use a tablet that has larger print and the child is able to read the Bible from that. If you're going in your classroom and everybody's taking turns reading a Bible verse, it might be helpful to have bigger font for a child with special needs. So you can use technology for that. They are visual learners. And then again, we are all visual learners, but even more so a child with special needs. So use visual supports when you're telling a Bible story. Pair pictures with the spoken words. Again, use felt. Anything you can make visually is going to improve memorization and understanding. Now, I want to show a little sample. A while back in the primary class, they were learning Psalm 91. And we have an amazing teacher in our Sabbath school, in our primary Sabbath school class. And she made pictures to go along with the words to Psalm 91. As you can see there, he who dwells, and there has a person and then a house, in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. So you can associate the visuals with the words, and this is very powerful to a child like my daughter. And then soon you won't need the words. They will just be able to recite it just by the pictures, and probably you can too. And then, of course, the chapter goes on. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him I will trust. Surely he shall deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the perilous pestilence. And you can see all the pictures there. And so all the children had access to this, not just my daughter, and they were able to quickly learn the whole Psalm 91. And of course, you pair that with a song, and how amazing it is that any child, but especially a child with Down syndrome or with other special needs, to be able to recite or sing Psalm 91. So this is an example of how visuals can make an impact for a child. Students with Down syndrome may have difficulty with sensory motor difficulties. So they will have difficulties processing information from many sources at one time. So for example, if you are teaching a concept and there is other sound behind in the background, like music playing in the background, it's going to be difficult for that child to focus and capture what you're saying because there's so many other inputs going on. So keep that in mind. Doing more than one thing at a time could be challenging, and responding quickly to some situations will be challenging too. So again, you need to allow for more extra time. A student may not be able to sit on the floor without back support. So you can use a chair, a pillow, or a prop. So keep in mind, what activity are you requiring the children to do? Are they all going to sit in a circle on the floor? What about the child with special needs in your classroom? Is he going to be able to do that? What supports can you have to be able to include that child in that activity? It's important if you're having chairs or desks that it'll be the right size for these children, for any child. And also remember that uneven surfaces are going to be difficult to navigate. So allow the students to practice walking on these surfaces if there's an activity that requires that. This next point, the concept of concept attainment. So mental age is going to be different than chronological age. My daughter is 15 years old in chronological age, but her mental age is not at 15 years. So there is a gap, there is a difference. So you need to adapt your lessons to accommodate that difference. use more concrete visual examples to teach abstract concepts. We know that abstract concept at getting abstract concepts comes much later in development. So be aware of that. Use concrete hands-on materials. They're going to be most effective, and use materials and activities that are age appropriate. And I included this picture here because often when we are trying to reach children with special needs, we think, oh, well, they're going to understand more at a level of a younger student. So we need to put them, even though they're teenagers, we're going to put them in a primary class so that they can understand the concept better. And that is not an appropriate way of thinking. They need to be included. True inclusion is with their same age peers. And Noelani, she's sitting right there. The other day, we were in church and I lost track of her. Where is she? And I look around, she is with the teenagers, with those her age. So she seeks the company of those her age, even though her mental ability may not be at that level, she still seeks their company. So it's important that we keep them with their same age peers, but provide some adaptation to meet their need. This is a great example of how you can make a give a concrete visual example to teach an abstract concept. So teacher Josh here was teaching, I believe, about the concept of how we grow as Christians and how we give fruits. And so he brought the visuals of the seed and the little plant, and then he brought out the big plant, the mature plant, and how the fruit is there too. So that was really a good way of explaining that abstract concept in a more concrete way. Here we have bringing the story to life, a very powerful tool you can use in your classroom if you have any children, but a child with special needs. So here we have the sanctuary and all of the lessons there, the spiritual lessons. So we created a physical and actual sanctuary of what it might have looked like, and all the rooms in the sanctuary and what happened in each room. So that was a really concrete way for Noelani and all the children to see the lessons in the sanctuary. You can play Bible charades, and that's a favorite activity of Noelani. And now this is Bible charades on steroids. You probably won't go this far, but here she got the opportunity to be a bystander at Jesus's crucifixion reenactment. And so that really brought that story to life for her. Daniel in the lion's den, what King Nebuchadnezzar might have been like in his throne. So if you can make things as concrete as possible. Now, what do you think this Bible story was? Yes, that is the Good Samaritan. So she was much younger here, but you can see how you can act out the stories, and so that the children can participate and see what it might have felt like to be in that story. And that would be a very powerful tool to use in your Sabbath schools. One very important tool that you all have is to have peer tutors. So have another child that is willing to help the child with special needs. Maybe pair them, and in whatever activity is going on, they can help each other. And that would be really powerful. Or have an assistant that might provide support that the student needs to be able to be included and involved in the regular activities that everybody else is doing, but just with a little extra support. And And motivation is very, very powerful in all students, but students with Down syndrome especially, they need more encouragement, and they really react very, very respond very well to motivation, encouragement, and acceptance. Beware of your language and try to use more positive language. Instead of saying, well, that's wrong. If the child gives an answer, that's wrong. How about saying, well, let's try another way. And of course, this applies to everyone, not just a child with disabilities. I wanted to include some information on autism. And sometimes students with autism, they're unsuccessful in school situations or learning environments because they're uncomfortable or they feel unsafe or even afraid of the environment. So there are some strategies that can be used to make the classroom a more sensory friendly classroom. And if you can think of different things like, what does the classroom space, what is it like the tables, the carpeted area? Is there a lot of clutter? Is there too much clashing colors? What's the temperature? Are there open windows? You know, all these things, the lighting, the noise, the smells, they really make a big difference. And the best thing you can do is to ask the family how you can best support that student. Ask them, is there a kind of noise or smell or something that is more troublesome for your child? And then eliminate that from the environment. So simple things that we take for granted. Smells like perfume or even food can be really bothersome to a child with this kind of need. So be aware of that. Again, food smells, they can be very distracting. And on the other hand, pleasant smells may be very comforting and relaxing. So again, communicate with the family to see how you can best support the student. Even things like the lights that flicker, that could be very distracting. You can try using natural light instead. And I have a handout that I will put a link to in the chat, and it has more resources that you can go. There's links that you can go, like for example, for this, and you can find much detailed information on how to address those needs, and some other resources that you can use. Attention problems, that's a big one. Well, how can you deal with that? You can allow for movements, get the wiggles out, have some movement breaks, vary your instruction. Maybe you can vary it at least every 10, 15 minutes. You can give lecture style, then move to do more group work, then maybe sing a song. So if you vary your instruction, you're more apt to keep their attention. Use signals. So maybe if you have a problem with this, if you have a student that has attention problems, maybe you can have a private signal that you can use to when that student is tuned out. So maybe a gentle tap on the shoulder or maybe standing next to them, and that can be very effective. And of course, minimize noise and distractions. Pay attention to sitting and avoid sitting students with Down syndrome near a window, door, or high traffic area. Now, this is a big one. I always actually sit in the front row. Ever since Noelani was a baby, I would just sit in the front row. And this is the reason. Because when I sit in the back or in the middle of the sanctuary or wherever I am, she will not be engaged with whatever is going on. She will be distracted, and it's actually more difficult for me to, or for her to attend to what's going on. But I found early on that if I just sit at the front row, she's right there. She's able to pay attention. She's engaged. And this is important, where the child is sitting. So pay attention to that. And which is another reason why we should not direct people or families with children with special needs to the mother's room or to the back of the church. Now, they may prefer that, and of course, that's up to them. But let's give them the choice, because I found that if I went to the mother's room or the back of the church, that would not work. So that is a big one, a big consideration there. Give immediate feedback and praise. And that way, that's going to ensure that the student associates a reward with their efforts. Okay, so I've done a lot of talking. I'm going to show you a lot of pictures now of what all of these concepts look like in real life. And I'm using our church and my daughter as an example. So vary instruction. Just make it interesting. Have the kids come to the front, have them engaged, not just have them sitting and listening, but bring them up to the front. Involve them, have them participate in however capability they're able to participate. Have visuals, make it interesting. Use many different modalities. Use repetition, act out the story, use a song. When you put anything to a song, you're gonna have the students' attention. Memory verses. If you put it to a song, Noelani is able to learn it really quickly. And this is a thing in our family worship. This is the part that Noelani shines, is in the hymns. She knows the hymns, she knows the titles of the hymns, she knows the tune, she can call it out even better and faster than I can. So that is a strength for her. So you can find out what is the strength in the child that you're trying to reach. And understand that, keep in mind that the impact is cumulative. So the repetition and incorporations of all these strategies, Sabbath after Sabbath, year after year, they're going to have a tremendous impact in all the children in their understanding of the gospel, and they're developing their relationship with Jesus. Focus on ability. What can the child do? Okay, so Noelani, is she able to pick up the offering? Yes. So that's a way she can be involved. Is she able to pray for the offering or have prayer? Yes. Is she able to hold a prop while other kids are telling the story? The juniors, here's some of the juniors telling the story or the lesson to the kindergarteners. How can Noelani be involved in that? Well, she can hold a prop while her friends tell the story. She can hold a picture. Here, I know the picture is very small, but we are taking part in a church service, and Noelani is able to do some things there too. So again, focus on what the child can do and include the child doing that. She can lead a song. She can help the little ones. She's really good with babies and with little ones. She can again hold a picture while brother is telling the mission story. Now, in all this, you're involving the child. You don't need to expect perfection, but don't withhold challenges either. So this is in this instance here, there was a Sabbath school that they were given seeds or beans, and they were supposed to make something, a picture or an object with them. Now notice brother was able to make, I don't know if that was a cross, the cross on a hill, and Noelani's look a little different, but she was involved in that and she felt included. Here she is playing the violin in a nursing home. Now I was leery about having her play, but our children's ministry director said, oh, have her join in. She can join in and just play open strings. And she was able to do that. And nobody could hear that she was not able to keep up or to play the right note. And she felt included in that. Now, I want to encourage you, as you think of ways to include people with special needs in your Sabbath school, make sure you transfer that to the church life, because children with special needs become adults with special needs, and they need to be involved in the church life. And as you see there, that inclusion in Sabbath school has been extended in church also, and she's able to participate in church things. Very important. Every person, every child must be given the opportunity not just to accept Jesus, but also to share Jesus with others. And Noelani has a real gift she's very outgoing and very friendly. And she's here doing some outreach, sharing Jesus with others, handing out tracts, going door to door. She was instrumental in our church group meeting the ranger at one of the parks that a lot of church members go to every Sabbath afternoon. And we have a friendship, and we're developing our friendship with the ranger there because of Noelani. So don't limit them in not just learning about Jesus, but sharing Jesus. And again, I could go on and on. I have more material than I have time to talk about, but we have her involved in ministering to the nursing homes and every activity. She's an active participant. She's part of the group, and that is what inclusion looks like. Now, going back to presuming competence, this is really, really important, because we need to assume that the student or that the child is capable. And one practical example I can tell you here is Noelani plays the violin. Now, when she started playing the violin or learning to play the violin, did I think she would be able to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or whatever little child's song? No, I had my doubts. But I had resolved early on, I'm going to give Noelani the same opportunities I am giving my non-disabled son. And I'm going to see what she does with that. So instead of putting a ceiling on her abilities and saying, oh no, she doesn't need to take music lessons, she's not going to be able to do that, that would be putting a ceiling. And of course, she'll never be able to do that because I set that ceiling. But instead, how about leaving that ceiling open? And I'm not talking about unrealistic expectations, but just don't set a ceiling at all. Give the same opportunities and then see what the child will do with that. And she has amazed us over and over again, not just in music, in swimming, but in anything. Don't set a limit. Just give the child the same opportunities and see what they will do with that. And I will leave you with, well, I'm almost finished. I know we're going to give some time for questions, but I'm going to have her play something for you. And that's what not setting a limit. That's what presuming competence. That's what inclusion looks like. And does it matter? Yes. I saw that it is in the providence of God that widows and orphans and blind, the deaf, the lame, and persons afflicted in a variety of ways have been placed in close Christian relationship to his church. It is to prove his people and develop their true character. Angels of God are watching to see how we treat these persons who need our sympathy, love, and disinterested benevolence. This is God's test of our character. If we have the true religion of the Bible, we shall feel that a debt of love, kindness, and interest is due to Christ in behalf of his brethren. And we can do no less than to show our gratitude for his immeasurable love to us while we were sinners, unworthy of his grace, by having a deep interest and unselfish love for those who are our brethren and who are less fortunate than ourselves. So yes, the truth is we are all sinners in need of a savior. We all have needs, some more visible than others, but we were all created in the image of God, regardless of our limitations. And of course, with Jesus as an example, we see that most of his miracles were to people with special needs, and we need to follow that example. And so I will open it now for questions, and I will do my best to answer.
Thank you, Auntie Hildelisa. And make sure you tell Noelani hi for me.
I will, and I will copy in the chat. Let's see that link to the handout. Hopefully that's
Hildelisa, if you can actually email that to Corinne, she'll add it to the folder that's available for everyone as well.
okay. I will do that.
That was an excellent talk. Thank you so much. And having heard Noelani play the violin in person, she's absolutely amazing. I mean, incredible. But if anybody has any questions, now's the time to ask them. Go ahead, Mary.
I just want to thank you for bringing the awareness of this. I've worked throughout the world and North America, and as I helped in Sabbath school, I noticed that was one area that our teachers were not trained in, is how to deal with challenged kids. Even what proper word to use for them. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I am so glad that this is on this track of workshop. And that's why I came to this.